head of the cavalry. And so in 334, when he invaded Asia Minor, then the first battle to the east of what was then Troy, he won with almost effortless ease.
During the Battle of the Granicus, the Macedonians were outnumbered 4-1, and Alexander was nearly killed, saved only by his trusted lieutenant and boyhood friend, Clytus. After the battle, in an act of revenge, the victorious Alexander ruthlessly massacred 20,000 Greek mercenaries who'd fought alongside the Persians.
There was a conscious use of terror there, and this deterrent aspect of Alexander's policy. We see it in Thebes, we see it at the Granicus, we see it in Tyre. There's resistance, organised opposition. The reaction is always savage repression to a degree that makes one shudder. But on the other hand, if people submit to him, accept his sovereignty, then he can be overwhelmingly generous.
Alexander was quickly on the move. The next major battle against Darius and the mighty Persian army was a turning point in the great campaign, the Battle of Issus. Issus was a small plain surrounded by high cliffs, making maneuvering difficult for the huge Persian army.
Alexander was able to drive the Persians into retreat so that they more or less trampled each other down in the narrows trying to escape. And so the great army of the Persian king more or less destroyed itself.
Darius fled in his chariot, and Alexander pursued him. And in the course of leaving the scene of the battle, Darius not only left his men behind, but also the royal baggage train, which contained the royal family, in one of his tents. And so they fell into the hands of Alexander.
The queen mother he treated as his own mother, and Darius' wife was given all the honours of a Persian queen. Now, the point was that Alexander is from now on, if not before, claiming that he is the proper king of Persia and Darius must submit to him.
There is a charming story that Alexander and his great friend Hephaestion went into the tent of the Queen Mother, and she looked at the two of them, not knowing who was whom, and she actually made obeisance to Hephaestion rather than Alexander, and realizing her mistake, clearly thought that she'd be run through with a sword, probably. But Alexander is said to have smiled gently and said, Hephaestion is also an Alexander.
The city of Tyre fell next. It was a textbook operation in siege warfare. Darius decided to negotiate terms.
Darius sent an offer back to Alexander at some stage, offering him all of the lands west of the Euphrates River, that's Iraq, to the Aegean, so a vast amount of territory, also a huge ransom for the royal women, and various other concessions. And everyone assumed that Alexander would leap at such a generous offer, which must have been more than he had originally dreamt of getting. And this is one of the many set pieces between Parmenio, who was one of his father's trusted lieutenants, and on this occasion Parmenio advises Alexander and says, I would take this offer if I were Alexander. And Alexander says, and I would take it if I were Parmenio.
Rejecting the peace offer, Alexander headed for Egypt. There he was greeted as a liberator, a hero, and founded a city on the Nile Delta, Alexandria. It was the first of many to bear his name. He sought advice at an ancient oracle, the Temple of Amun. Alexander emerged apparently convinced that he was indeed the son of a god and was now truly invincible. But Darius wasn't finished yet. At Gaugamela, he assembled the largest army the world had ever seen. It numbered 100,000 infantry, 40,000 cavalry, and 200 scythed chariots. Darius was determined to crush Alexander once and for all. At Gaugamela in 331 BC, Alexander was just one battle away from becoming the great king and toppling the Persian dynasty. Still only 25, Alexander was increasingly sure of his invincibility and divinity. King Darius and the Persians had plenty of time to assemble a new army, but Alexander was confident of victory. He decided to use a similar strategy as at the Battle of Issus to counteract the vast Persian army.
With one of his brilliant use of tactics, Alexander led with his right flank. And so to counter his advance, the Persian left flank moved in order to face him, and a gap appeared in the line, and Alexander was able to break through and surround the forces and fight them on both sides. And again, it was another rout, culminating in the flight of Darius.
Persian city after Persian city fell, including the mighty Babylon. Alexander and his troops soon reached Persepolis, the heart of the Persian Empire. Legend has it that he burnt it to the ground. Demoralized, Darius went on the run. He was aided by his cousin Bessus, a fierce warlord, who took over as commander of the Persian cavalry.
Now, Bessus was the very formidable governor of Bactria, who'd fought at Gaugamela and stayed with King Darius until the very end, when he had him arrested and murdered and stabbed, and then challenged Alexander for the Persian Empire.
Bessus was brutally murdered. Before Alexander got there, he was betrayed, and one legend has that he was tied to two trees that were bent in towards each other and then obviously torn apart when the trees were released, which is not a very pleasant death for anyone. But his head was sent to Alexander, and I think the message was very clear that Alexander was to have no competition as great king of Persia.